All right, time for a redraft, people. And 2005 is where we're going today. And 2005, of course, was coming out of the lockout wipeout season. And this draft, everybody knew how good Sidney Crosby was going to be. And then when the Pittsburgh Penguins were revealed as surprise, the number one draft pick, we all went, "Oh, of course it is." And so I remember as a Canuck fan, they got to the top 10, like, "Hey, we're in the top 10." And then number 10 was Vancouver, and I went, "All right, fine." But yeah, so Sidney Crosby ends up being the number one draft pick to Pittsburgh. This is after they'd already had Marc-Andre Fleury and Malkin, and yeah, that would definitely help any team out. You get your starting goaltender, you get your top two centers. They also drafted another pretty big piece of those Stanley Cup winning teams that year. But we'll get to that. So I had to change back to just drafting the best 30 players out of the draft because there were a lot of misses in this draft. Benoit Pouliot went at 4. Jack Johnson went at 3. Jack Johnson's had a long career. Does he belong at 3 on a draft? Probably not. Bobby Ryan was number 2. Jack Skilly gets drafted in the top 10. Brian Lee went in the top 10. Luc Bourdon, again, that's one of those rest in peace situations. It's always tough when you mention Luc Bourdon in a video. He did play 36 games in his career. It looked like he was going to break through at the end with the Canucks, but he passed away before that, so he is not included for me in the top 30 of a redraft because we just don't know. Of course, Kopitar goes at 11. Whoops. Stahl after that. Marek Zagrapan was picked up by the Buffalo Sabres. Sasha Pakolik is picked up by Washington. Ryan O'Mara, 33 games in his career. He was a New York Islander, played for the Oilers. And Alex Bourret was drafted by the Atlanta Thrashers, now the Winnipeg Jets, thus the Winnipeg Magnet. Ryan Perrott, he bounced around a bit in the league. Teams thinking they could get him on board and get him going. Played 106 games in his career. Kendall McCardle, 42 games for him. He was drafted by Florida. Matt Lashoff, drafted by the Boston Bruins, played 74 games in his career. Matt Pelech, 13 games, drafted by the Flames. Joe Finley played 21, drafted by Washington. And Vladimir Mihalik was drafted 30th overall by the Tampa Bay Lightning, and he played 15 games in his NHL career. My point is this. If I was trying to draft just out of these guys, by halfway through the round, I'm like, and what's the point? By about halfway through, it's like, yeah, we're just picking between. And even looking through this entire draft, coming up with a first round, 30 players who for the first round, it was not easy. I was basically choosing between, well, this guy isn't in the NHL anymore, and neither is this guy, but that guy had a pretty good, I guess. So it does get kind of tough. And yeah, we'll see. And of course, the nice thing was the steal of that draft was Tuukka Rask for Toronto. So good on Toronto. They can't possibly mess that up. And I'm being honest that it was the steal of the draft, that Tuukka Rask at 21 was absolutely the steal. But anyways, although Kopitar right next to him there at 11 wasn't too bad either. Number 1 overall, no surprise to anybody. You can act surprised if you want, is of course Mark Stahl. Mark Stahl first overall, not Sidney Crosby. Sidney, he's been the best player of his generation. How long generations go? Do you count 10 years as a generation? 15? Crosby's been the best of the bunch, and he easily goes first overall again. I can't see any situation where he doesn't. I really legit can't. I think if you combine the 04 and the 05 drafts and you're looking at Ovechkin versus Crosby, that's where things could get fascinating. And at some point when I'm doing redrafts, maybe I do a redraft where I combine years. We say, all right, if you take the entire 04 class, the entire 05 class, and the entire 06 class, and you draft them all at once, how does that look? So at number 2 overall, and this is Anaheim drafting, their history changes quite a bit if they had taken a chance on Kopitar. I know people who are much younger, teenagers, early 20s, might look at Kopitar being 11th and say, how did Kopitar stay on the board that long? Because there were GMs and scouts who were concerned about the level of competition Kopitar had faced and whether or not his NHL upside and how long is it going to take for him to develop. And there were very vocal fans that were very upset that Kopitar fell as far as he did. I'm thinking especially of fans in Ottawa and Vancouver who were not happy that Kopitar dropped to them and then dropped below them. Where it was like, wait, we took Brian Lee, wait, we took Luc Bourdon, but we know what Kopitar, and again, as fans, we can be very vocal about this kind of thing. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. And because I remember also Canuck fans being very vocal about we need to move up in the draft and get Gilbert Brulé. Remember that being a conversation as well. So fans can be right and can be wrong. And so Kopitar, I think, would go at number 2 if you redraft this. Absolutely. So at number 3, again, looking at this as a redraft, the Carolina Hurricanes with the number 3 overall pick cause a meltdown for Pierre Maguire at number 3 with Carey Price. Carey Price goes at number 3. I can't see any way you don't draft Carey Price if you're Carolina. And how different would things be in Montreal? How different would things be in Carolina if Carey Price had been drafted by the Carolina Hurricanes? So again, that is an amazing top 3. That is a very, very talented top 3. And yeah, that I think would be the top 3. And then things kind of start to get a little bit shaky when it comes to who's going to be drafted where. Number 4 overall, I'm going to say right now there's a lot of goalies in this draft. There are a lot of goalies in this draft. So just throwing that out there. Number, at least in the redraft. Number 4, going to Minnesota. I'm going to have Tuukka Rask go to the Minnesota Wild. Yep. I'll have Tuukka Rask go 4th overall. Tuukka absolutely been a really, really solid goaltender for a very long time for the Boston Bruins. And if he'd been drafted by Minnesota, I mean, just think of what Carolina and Minnesota could have done by drafting goaltenders there. And for people who say, well, why don't goalies get drafted more often in the first round? Because as much as we can look at Price and Tuukka Rask and say, oh, those guys would absolutely get drafted higher now, you can also point out plenty of goaltenders drafted in the first round. Chet Pickard comes to mind that didn't make it to the NHL level. Trevor Kidd for the Flames was one that he made the NHL, but he never quite reached that ceiling that was envisioned for him. And so goaltenders, it can be really, really tough to figure out which one's going to make it. Although Rask, at the time he was picked, looked like an excellent choice for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then, of course, he would get traded. At number 5, now, I can't see how he would drop past 5. So I'm going to put... yeah, I'll put him at 5 to the Montreal Canadiens. Chris Letang. Chris Letang that year was drafted 62nd overall. So I'll put 62 next to him because he's drafted 62nd overall by the Pittsburgh Penguins. Chris Letang, amazing defenseman, and if Montreal had drafted him, yeah, you don't get Carey Price, but you get Chris Letang. Letang, one of those pieces, as I said, that Pittsburgh picks up in this draft, which became pretty important when they started winning. So Letang, a very astute pick at 62, and for me, he goes at 5th overall in this draft. At number 6, oh, this is a tough call between these two. Again, goaltenders are just going to dominate this draft. This redraft is going to be made up of a lot of goaltenders. Yeah, I can't... So we're going to do 2 goaltenders here. Moving up from 72nd overall and going to Columbus is Jonathan Quick, who was drafted 72nd overall by the LA Kings, of course, back in 2005, and has had an amazing career. Now, the other goaltender that I was kind of hemming and hawing on, going to Chicago at the next pick, instead of Jack Skilly. Sorry, Jack Skilly. He was drafted 85th that year by St. Louis, and I'm going to go with Ben Bishop. Again, this is an excellent draft for goaltenders. Carey Price, Tuukka Rask, Jonathan Quick, Ben Bishop. I take Quick ahead of Bishop because Jonathan Quick has proven in the playoffs he can win Stanley Cups. That's the only reason I'm taking Quick over Bishop. Bishop's the better goaltender right now. You can argue Bishop right now ahead of Quick. I would say over their entire careers, I would argue Quick ahead of Bishop. You could argue Quick over Rask if you wanted to. Rask's had a couple of runs along the way in the playoffs, but that Stanley Cup victory, there's 2 of them for Quick, and Bishop is still seeking his first. So again, really, really excellent goaltender class. This was one year where goaltenders could have just gone in the first round. If that had been the draft, Pierre Maguire would have been in tears. Pierre Maguire would have completely lost his mind. Why are there 4 goalies? What's going on? Why? Why is this happening? I don't even know why I got up today. This is This whole draft is dumb. All you general managers, he'd get up at the microphone. He'd take it away from from Gary Bettman. Why are you doing this? This is terrible. This draft is a sham. This is a joke. Why is Benoit Pouliot on the board? Why is Bobby Ryan still up there? Why is Jack Johnson, Gilbert Brule, Jack Skilly? You guys are morons. I'm out of here. I'm leaving. Pierre, are you crying? I'm not crying. You're crying. All right. At the next pick, I'm going to take somebody who actually got drafted in the first round. TJ Oshie. TJ Oshie has had an excellent career. He was drafted by St. Louis in the first round that year. Very astute pick. Late round steal for the St. Louis Blues in a year where a lot of first round picks kind of ended up missing. So I would take TJ Oshie to move up to 8th from 24th and go to the San Jose Sharks instead of St. Louis. So how's that for a change of things? TJ Oshie going there. At the next spot, I can't see him dropping further, just when you look at his overall career. San Jose drafted Marc-Edouard Vlasic 35th overall that season. I can't see Vlasic dropping past 9. So yes, Ottawa still picks a defenseman. Bit of a different defenseman between Brian Lee and Marc-Edouard Vlasic. I want to say this with Brian Lee too, though. Brian Lee had a decent enough career, and then he kind of walked away. And I respect that. I respect that he went, I'm going to walk away. I've got other career options in my life. I'm going to walk away from hockey. I do respect that. But Vlasic goes to Ottawa instead of San Jose. I can't see. And if you want to argue Vlasic ahead of Oshie, you probably can. I'm not going to try to argue that with you. I really genuinely don't try to argue these one way or the other. It's just fun to do a redraft and then see where other people would redraft. Players. Number 10. Yeah, I'll have Vancouver at 10. Drafting Paul Stastny. So Paul Stastny went at 44th to Colorado. Paul Stastny's had a very up and down career, but right now, during his time in Vegas, he still looks pretty good. He's still got the offense. He's bought into the two-way game and all of that other wonderful stuff. I do like Stastny to go at 10th overall. And that's ahead of some decent names on this list here. There are still goalies out there, I'm just saying. There are still goalies yet to be drafted in this one. At 11... At 11... Yeah, all right. We'll do this one at 11. Going to the LA Kings... Patrick Hornquist moves from 230th to 11th. And Hornquist goes to the LA Kings. It is not consolation for losing Anze Kopitar, but Hornquist has been a pretty good player at the NHL level for a long time. And he can score big goals, and he gets into the dirty areas, and he's aggravating to the opposition. And so for that reason, I'll have Hornquist at 11. People just fast forward to the end and just go, I can't believe you drafted this guy here. Why'd you draft him there? Why didn't you watch the video? Why didn't you watch? That's all I ask is to watch it. Number 12. Okay, back to the blue line. And drafted by Dallas that year, but now he moves up to 12th and ends up with the New York Rangers instead. Matt Niskanen. I like Niskanen. Solid defenseman. When Dallas traded him, I was kind of like, really? You're going to trade Niskanen? Awesome. Great. Cool. And yeah, Niskanen's had a good run. He's been good this year. And yeah, I would have him going at 12th. So again, you'll see that this draft is just really all over the place. A lot of guys who are in the top spots are no longer in the top spots. Number 13. I can't see him dropping any further than that. So James Neal was taken 33rd overall that year by Dallas. And he's moved around the league and bounced around the league. But he's enough of a goal scorer that it's too tantalizing not to take him at 13th overall for the Buffalo Sabres. He's played a few more games in the NHL than Marek Zagrapan, but, there's still time. Zagrapan can... 15 years, probably not. But, so James Neal I have going at 13th overall. 14th overall. Okay. There have been debates along the way about whether or not Nicholas Hjalmarsson is overpaid. The Chicago Blackhawks, he was one of those sacrifices they had to make when they were having trouble staying under the cap. I don't think Hjalmarsson's overpaid. Hjalmarsson's had a very, very solid career. He has played in Arizona, which means that he flies under the radar. That's how it works with the Coyotes. But he's been a very solid defenseman all around, and he can play a ton of minutes. And I don't see how Hjalmarsson falls further in the draft than that. But we're already into Nick Hjalmarsson, and then we can have that debate about how strong the draft was or not. We can have that debate after this. At 14, yeah, I can't see him falling any further either. Keith Yandle has a lot of offense. He does. Keith Yandle has a ton of offense. He's drafted 105th overall by Arizona, which was Phoenix at the time. And yet, you know, Yandle does have his defensive deficiencies along the way. But he's a good defenseman. He just needs somebody with him to make sure he's covering up from some of the defensive lapses. But yeah, Yandle, he moves up from 105th to 15th in this draft. And again, if you want to argue Yandle over Hjalmarsson because of Yandle's offense, but Yandle and Hjalmarsson together, that might be a decent defensive tandem. I'm just thinking, like, Yandle was in Arizona. Could they have been? I don't know. All right, next up, I'm thinking about doing another defenseman here because it's been a bit of a run on defensemen, and I don't think it necessarily stops here. Yeah, I'll go with Strawman here. So the former Atlanta Thrashers, the Arizona Coyotes moved to Winnipeg, and the Atlanta Thrashers, or the Arizona Coyotes moved from Winnipeg. The Atlanta Thrashers moved to Winnipeg. Both of them start with A, and it's sometimes one of the reasons I do multiple takes is because I mix one up with the other. Strawman, sometimes you're just too old. Strawman moves up from 216th, where he's drafted by Toronto. Very, very astute late steal by Toronto. This was a good draft for Toronto. Sorry to Toronto Maple Leaf fans out there everywhere. You had Strawman, you had Rask, and then you had neither. And that's one of those things that Toronto was not very good at asset management in the mid-2000s. Asset management, usually it was, we want to get better now, we don't want to wait till later, so we'll take these future guys, we'll get rid of them, we'll bring in guys who can help us now and try to win now. And it's a way of thinking that really was outdated even then. You don't see it as much now, and not to that degree, but you know, it really shows up when you look at this draft. Strawman's turned into a pretty decent defenseman all around. Number 16. There's a few I'm debating between here. You know what? I'm gonna put under Andrew Cogliano here. Cogliano, absolutely amazing run of not missing a single game. Really decent forward. The offense never reached what was expected when Edmonton drafted him in the first round. But Anaheim wasn't looking for that from him. And really, really solid forward for Anaheim. And I really like him in Dallas. I think he's fit in really well. And I think he's one of those guys that I think on any team he would do quite well. I think he'll fit in no matter where you want him to play. And at times, if you need him to play in top six and play a little bit, he can. So yeah, for me, Cogliano, really good, long career, consistent player. Seems like a really good team guy. I will draft Cogliano in that spot. Next up, I'm going to go back to the blue line, which makes sense because it's Nashville. I'm going to have Nashville draft Mark Stahl. Mark Stahl drops from 12th down to 18th. Goes to Nashville. Mark Stahl might be a bit overpaid by NHL standards right now. I think it's about right. But anyways, I still think Mark Stahl is a defensive defenseman. Overall solid career. Still playing. Still able to play the game. And whether it's going to be with the Rangers next year or what happens next season, who knows. But Stahl's still in the league. And for me, he's had a really solid career. Next up. I don't really want to draft him there. Now, speaking of contracts, Jack Johnson is overpaid. We all agree on that. Jack Johnson's contract is ridiculous. But Jack Johnson got that contract because he has had good seasons in his career. He has. He's had some good years along the way. He's still in the NHL. And again, this is 15 years out from the draft. He's still in the NHL. And he's had a relatively solid career overall. And so, for me, Johnson still ends up in the top 20. Now, at 20 is a player who's been felled by injuries. And if not for injury, I might have taken him sooner. So I'm going to take him at 20, Martin Hanzal. Martin Hanzal, again, injuries have definitely shortened his career, and he's had a really hard time with staying healthy recently, which is too bad because Hanzal can be a very useful player. And again, if he'd been healthy the whole way through, maybe he ends up as high as where Cogliano is. Maybe he bumps Stralman down. But for me, yeah, I end up with Hanzal at that level, and I do apologize because I know healthy, he probably ends up higher up in the overall draft. Next up, drafted by Columbus that year was Chris Russell. Chris Russell was drafted 67th overall by the Columbus Blue Jackets. Probably doesn't have two S's in Chris because he's not a member of the Kiss Army. So, Chris Russell, 67th overall draft pick, moves up to 21 in my redraft. He's probably better than people outside of Edmonton think he is. Great. And I think he's proven himself in Edmonton to be better than he was thought to be. I think it was expanded, like the advanced stats people that wanted him to just go. Advanced stats tell you Chris Russell isn't any good. I remember that argument a few years ago. I don't hear that as much now. And again, I've said this before, I think advanced stats sometimes point to a guy being misused. So that's when a guy's really bad advanced stats, I'm thinking, okay, so is he playing too many minutes? Is he playing against the wrong maybe he's on the wrong side of the ice. Maybe he played better on the other side. So if he's a left winger, maybe he's more suited to the right side. If he's a right side defenseman, maybe he's more suited to the left. These are the kind of conversations I kind of have when I'm looking at the numbers and wondering about how players are being used and what is their competition look and all this stuff. So there's definitely more to it than that, and I think Chris Russell's been pretty solid for Edmonton all around. Next up, at 22, I'm going to have Bobby Ryan going to Boston. Bobby Ryan had some excellent seasons early on, and up until he signed that contract with Ottawa, honestly, good top six forward. The last few years, for me, drag him down. The last few years do drag down Bobby Ryan overall, and that's why I have him going behind a guy like Cogliano, because if you're trading for a player right now, Cogliano's going to get more interest than Bobby Ryan. Now, Bobby Ryan, with everything he's fought through and with the fact that he was starting to pick up the offense after making his return to the league, it's very possible if I did this redraft again a year from now, maybe Ryan ends up going ahead of Stralman. Maybe he goes ahead of Cogliano, below Stralman. But for right now, for the overall numbers and for what we're looking at, I have Bobby Ryan at 22. 23. Alex Stalock's come into his own this year, so I'm going to have him move up from 112. He was drafted by the San Jose Sharks, so there's a trivia answer for you. Now we're down to the last bits here. I'm going to have Darren Helm. Darren Helm was taken 132nd overall by Detroit. Detroit's pretty good when it comes to the outside the first round guys. So instead of Oshie, you get Helm in St. Louis. 25. Andre Pavlik, goaltender. I have going next to the Edmonton Oilers. So that's another goaltender in this first round. Lots and lots of goalies in this first round. And then we'll go to... I'll say that Calgary, with that pick there, they decided to go with some toughness in their lineup. And a guy who's still in the NHL, was drafted 156th overall by St. Louis. That's Ryan Reeves. So he goes there. Next up, still in the NHL. He's overpaid. Yes, agreed. Yep, But I'll have Justin Abdelkader go there. He's drafted 42nd overall by Detroit, so that's 2 Detroit draft picks getting into the first round who were not in the first round. At 28, this is a tough one. I'm going to take Mason Raymond at 28. He was taken 51st overall by Vancouver. At 29, he came back into the NHL this year. So I had some names on that list that I'm like, man, he was okay. He played for a while in the NHL, that kind of thing. But Nathan Gerbe, to me, goes from 142nd up to 29th in this draft. And then 30th overall, oddly enough, a darling of analytics is Cody Franzen. Let me just take a quick look here. And yeah, I got everybody. So yeah, there's your first round. Again, I obscured some people who, in like I said, Bourdon's case, no longer with us, and players that just didn't play as long. Setaguchi, you could make an argument for ahead of Franzen. That argument can be made. Pouliot, you can make an argument would potentially go ahead of Franzen. But, you know, the overall storyline out of the 2005 draft, a lot of busts. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. And if you're going to argue that Sidney Crosby wouldn't have gone number 1 overall, you are wrong, good sir. Thank you so much for watching, though. Hey, and hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through you just happened upon this video. Remember, stay home where you can. Make sure that you're safe as possible in this time that we're in. And keep your hands nice and clean. Hey, thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.